Okay. Retakes. Let's go. Oh, there we go. So, if you've been involved with the art community on Tumblr lately, you may or may not have stumbled upon a little blog called TheRedLineStation. TheRedLineStation was conceived by artist Joakim this summer, and has since been growing a team of dedicated moderators and a following. Well, a slight following at least. On that blog, we mods critique and give advice on art through drawings sent in by followers. It's like a very neat community. It's very positive, very enthusiastic energy generally, at least in our experience. So please drop by and see what that's all about if you haven't already. I'm sure some of you at least are coming from the blog already, so. It's been like a couple of months since Joakim opened the mod application first and got the ball rolling on it. So we're still figuring things out, experimenting with how we want to do things, and yeah, it's gonna be great in time when everything is settled. It's already pretty great. And this too, like this venture into YouTube is also very experimental, and it's gonna be a little bumpy in the beginning. We're gonna figure it out as we go and get better and like, yeah, we're gonna figure it out, don't worry. So this podcast video series, what you want to call it, is gonna be like the first venture into videos and how we're gonna tackle the video format as TheRedLineStation. And this is my first podcast too, or video podcast and video series that is in this particular format. And I'm very new to this whole speaking into a microphone and getting things recorded and edited. So forgive me if I'm like a little insecure, I guess. Like not so confident in my capacity of language and speaking and articulating. I'm gonna try and do my best, but hopefully over time it'll get a little less rigid. So if this video series, if this podcast series gets like sufficient attention and a little bit of positive feedback, I'm gonna consider to continue it and make it like a little, not regular thing. I have a lot of projects and a life outside of this too that I need to take care of, but I'm gonna try and churn out a podcast every now and again. So while TheRedLineStation contents itself with critiquing specific pieces of art, Chatterbox is gonna be a lot more broad, a lot more, not abstract, but it's gonna be able to brace a little wider, because we're not gonna focus on singular critiquing. I have some portfolio critiques I want to do. I'm gonna open slots for portfolio critiquing, but that's still gonna be more of an overall like critique. So we're not gonna be specific here. We're gonna talk about larger subjects like art block or performance anxiety, shape language, you know, things that are a little less circumstantial than the Redline critiques. And yeah, Chatterbox is gonna be pretty much dictated by you guys. Like, you are gonna hopefully go into our inbox and tell us what you want to talk about and who you want to have on the podcast. I'm willing to reach out to artists, mods, or, you know, people and ask them if they can come talk about a certain topic. It's an open, nice little space. I'm gonna spend this episode giving you a little bit of insight on myself and kind of leave you to contemplate what you want to hear me talk about after you've become acquainted with my methods and approaches. At least I hope you'd want me to talk about something after you've like come to know me artistically, because otherwise it's gonna be a very short and abruptly ended series, I suppose. So first things first, I'm Wackart, known as Mod Wackart on TheRedLineStation. I have over 7 years of experience working professionally as an illustrator, in combination of working commission through the internet and with corporate clients. In 2016, I went through a semester course on intensive classical studies at the animation workshop in Viborg, here in Denmark. And in 2017, I think it was, I enrolled at the Royal Academy of Art and Design in Copenhagen, where I'm currently studying for my degree in game art, with my focus on art direction and story worlds and sequential storytelling and all those kinds of fictional design disciplines, really. But while I have experience in classical studies from Tar, my forte is definitely in the stylized department, which is why a lot of my art featured in this series is going to be somewhat in that vein. So to give you an in-depth look on how I generally do things when not commissioned or otherwise prompted to tackle commission like differently from my own native style, I'll be breaking down my 5 phases. So the 5 phases are as following: thumbnailing, sketching, lining, flat coloring, shading, and mastering. And I mean, you could argue that the last bullet point could be split in 2, but generally I always wind up shading and mastering somewhat simultaneously, and honestly I like the sound of 5 phases rather than 6 phases, so call me inconsistent, I'm a dork like that, okay? So composition and thumbnailing, really. I don't actually have any footage from this particular phase, because it was conceived pretty much unintentionally. I'm sure many of you tried that yourself, like you suddenly just whip out something amazing and you have no like documentation at all because you're so into it. It was kind of spurred on after a critique session by 2 other mods on the blog. Fantastic feedback, and it really like I'd been down a little bit. I didn't want to draw all that much, but then suddenly I got this amazing feedback that just I was hooked, and I completely forgot to record the process. Thumbnailing was a step that I until recently hadn't really paid attention to. Like, I was ignorant that it was so important, because you know, I just couldn't see reason to like quote unquote waste time on something like this. I felt perfectly comfortable just starting my sketch immediately and tweak it as I went. I didn't think I needed to sit myself down and outright plan the composition. But like after I attended a lot of cinematography classes and did storytelling and storyboarding, I realized that this is like crucial to me, at least, to set myself into as a separate phase. Otherwise my layout and my composition would simply suffer. So not only does this step allow me to experiment with the composition and light setting and, you know, values and all that, it also I'm free of any restrictions that apply to correct anatomy and shaping and colors. It's just kind of a free for all. I can do whatever I want. I can erase, I can draw over it, like anything, and alter everything. It's just a chaotic mess at first. So I personally use like broad brush strokes, large brushes. I don't refine anything. I'm literally just tossing general shapes onto the paper or canvas. I don't really care about any finesse at all. It's all about getting that composition right, and that means like scaling back any detailing and any construction most of the time. In this phase I also consider like what story I want to tell. What am I gonna try to convey with this picture? Is it gonna be like a fight scene? Is it a dialogue? How is the dynamic? How is the post dynamic? How does the characters act according to one another, and where are they in relation to one another on the canvas? Once I've set all the elements down, I've got the composition somewhat roughened out, I grab a big soft brush and I plot in the primary light sources. I tweak the values of the grayscale hues to accommodate for the light so I can get some depth into the picture. Usually I follow the rule that the further back in the picture an element is, the lighter the value should be. And the closer to quote unquote the camera an element sits, the darker and more rich the hue. What's notable is how far from the image I am when drawing thumbnails, and generally I like to stay at a distance when drawing. I like to keep overview, but especially in this phase, I don't zoom in at all. I try just to stay far away from my composition in a sense, so I have like a perfect overview and I don't get distracted by going into this one specific detail in this one specific corner. I just work with the broad and general shapes. After every phase I tend to take a break, especially if the piece is massive and I'm pouring like hours of effort into it. I'll leave it. I'll finish a phase and I leave it for the rest of the day, because then when I get back I get to take a look at the composition with like fresh eyes, I guess. Like, I have a fresh mindset. I can look at it and pick out flaws and weaknesses a lot easier and a lot more detached than what I would have been when I've just created it and been all enamored, I guess, at my own amazing skill. It also happens in phases, especially in the early stages. If I have a thumbnail and I suddenly make a major change to something. I let it sit for a while just so I can contemplate this change a little clearer when I get back. Sometimes, like, I think this one actually went on for 3 or 4 days where I came and went and I tweaked here, moved that, did another thing, made another creature, put another thing there, but eventually I had to stop. And usually I have to tell myself, like, you know, finished, not perfect. Because as an artist, which I guess a lot of you probably feel too, you can get stuck in these cycles of just constant editing and constant perfecting, and eventually you get like tired and bored because you're either worn down, you've worked too much in this piece, or you're frustrated that you cannot achieve what you want to. So eventually I'll just like, okay, right, it's done, whatever, move on, despite maybe seeing a flaw to it. My usual mantra is that after the second or third day working with the thumbnail, it's probably time to bite the bullet and move on. If I work focused on a composition, I don't want it taking more than a week in total to get it all together. So 3 days is more than enough. It's actually a little too much. Sketching. So this is definitely my favorite phase. I still have the freedom to take the designs and aesthetic of the picture where I want it to, and I'm still not committing to anything. This is where my anatomical and abstract and design know-how come to use, constructing the characters properly and thoroughly fleshing out their environment and putting like little bits of details here and there. It's all still kind of a cesspool of inputs, but beginning to take shape. It's a very, very vibrant stage where everything can still happen, but you're like narrowing down your possibilities at this point. As you can probably see yourself, my current style tropes revolve around these really strong blocky planes and very little clutter. I'm very focused on these semi-cartoony shapes, where the abstractions mostly revolve around pushing proportions and shapes into these very angular, dramatic constellations. So mapping out things like environmental details with simple indications, how I usually go about the background, I don't want to waste, well, not waste, I just don't want to spend time on the background in this phase, because nature is so chaotic that if I start putting down perfectly calculated details, I'm gonna wind up making it look super stiff at the end. So I focus mostly on the characters and the design of these characters. I'm still zoomed out a good bit of the time. I do go in sometimes on occasion to be able to see what I'm constructing a little more in detail, but I'm still mostly focused on proportions and silhouettes. The sketching phase is, broadly speaking, the last part of my chaotic sequence, I guess. It's my last chance to implement little tidbits and ideas before I solidify anything in the line art phase. This one took about 6 hours to sketch up because I kept going back and forth on some things. I think the placement of the spear, there was something about the hand I had to go about twice. But the rule still applies. Finished not perfect, and after the 6th hour I decided that this is enough. I really need to sleep. It's so late, so I wrapped it up. Lining. Okay, this phase is actually rather straightforward for me. I usually just zone out and relax while doing line art, since in most cases I work my sketch to a point where I have everything I need to just sit there and completely space out while I draw. My sketch is still rather vibrant, it's not clean, so I have to be aware that my lines don't get hairy, but I don't care to do super clean lines, at least not in this style, because in this format, which I work with, the pixel dimensions are so high that when you zoom out and view the picture from, 100% where it's supposed to be viewed, you can't see these little tidbits and impurities much. I am very vigilant about those hairy lines, and I do go around cleaning those up when they appear. Usually I don't go any closer than 300%, because I feel like if I'm working on a detail in which I have to zoom in that much, I am probably not gonna be able to see it when I zoom out and look at the picture as a whole. So it's a waste of time, to me at least. I don't do Art Nouveau pieces with thousands of details. It's not how I do it. You might also notice that I don't follow the sketch 100%. There's a lot of muscle definitions that are not complete per se. I exchanged a lot of lines with little hatches of lots of lining to kind of give volume, but not like busy the composition with an abundance of lines. This method is very prevalent in comic book styles, since these little tidbits relay so much information about a piece of anatomy or volume of an object through so little. So mastering this can be incredibly helpful if you want to do semi-realistic comic book kind of art, at least in like the classic comic book style. These marks also help me later when I need to shade, because then I can detect where the form curves and where it narrows in. It gives a better picture generally of the volume of the body and makes it so much easier to shade correctly. You might notice that I'm drawing bold lines around my characters and my background elements. This is because when I flat color, I do layer masking. So I fill in a character with one base color and then I mask layers on top of it. And this can be done using the magic wand tool, but for that to work, you have to make sure that your line that doesn't have any like gaps at all. So that's why I'm going about and like giving them a little extra thickness around the silhouette. You can see like on the basilisk, the mane is divided into these large triangular shapes. And between some of those, the lines get darker and bolder, and that is because I want to separate the planes. I also sometimes use dark lines to draw the attention of the viewer to a certain area. I combine it with great contrasts and space versus negative spaces around these hard lines, so I can dictate how my viewer's eyes move through the picture. This leading of the eye is what we call storytelling, and it's a little tricky to begin with, but when you get it down, it's really helpful. It's a really invaluable tool to your artistic toolbox. I don't really pay much mind to the grass, or I'm not the type to draw out every blade of grass. I find that tedious, and I think it makes the line art like needlessly busy. It removes our attention from the focal point. The bamboo was drawn with a smaller brush. I chipped a few pixels off the brush to make sure that it appeared further in the back. My usual go-to is that the thinner the lines, the further in the back, and the thicker the outline, the further in the front. It's a very rudimentary, but it's worked for me so far. Flats. Okay, flats is the simplest phase of it all. I fill in a mask on each element, I create layer masks on top of that element, and I fill in the colors with each color on a layer for itself. I do this because I go back later and I tweak through hue, saturation, and curves, and separating every color on a layer means I can tweak them all individually, which helps a great deal because I'm the type to always go back and forth and try all kinds of palettes and swatches to see what kind of suits this composition the best. I also use textures. I have a very specific texture which I keep going back to. It's kind of become a way for me to express myself in the aesthetic I want to go for in a lot of my more story-driven illustrations. I fidget a lot with the blending modes too. I try to experiment and see what gives the strongest atmosphere. I'm not always done tweaking when I finish this phase. I usually have a general idea, and I've encompassed my general idea in terms of color and palette, but I'm never 100% satisfied. I always move on to the next phase, kind of still experimenting, but getting there. The final phase is 2 steps in one, most of the time. I have the odd project where they are separate, but more often than not, parts of the flats process bleeds into this one. Because as I said, I'm still working out how I want it to look exactly. I still make use of curves and hue and saturation and numerous layer types and gradients to bring the piece together. And in this phase, I stay zoomed out all the time. I don't zoom in at all. I need the complete overview to make sure that everything is consistent and conveys what I wanted to convey. This is when I start shading. I do cell shading. I like how my low detail gray lends itself very well to cell shading, so it's just my preferred go-to. What follows is the final touches. I've come to call it mastering over the years. I think it's more of the music and sound engineering term, but I just apply it here because it encompasses this whole idea that you're bringing it together, you're wrapping it up nicely, you're making your final touches. I usually go in and either satirize or desaturize elements to put them further in the front or the back of a composition. I add details like environmental fog or provide like final tweaks to the texture layers or colors, applying whatever assets I want on the picture, which is usually my logo. In this particular one, I included some links because this is going into my official portfolio. Mastering, like thumbnailing, was a phase and a stage I didn't consider much of until like recently. But turns out giving your picture the final once over and double checking that everything conveys as you want it to is really helpful. Instead of getting excited and just throwing your art out there. Taking just the last couple of hours to really double check everything makes it all so much more satisfying to publish, and it looks better too. Like you catch so many weaknesses or you implement improvements that you didn't really consider it to begin with. I upload and I rejoice. I finished a piece of art, and now regardless if I'd be criticizing it in the morning, which I absolutely will because I'm a cretin about my own art, I managed to finish something. It's always very rewarding to finalize something. So that's my current pipeline for my more illustrative work. Granted, my way is not the only way, but I thought it would be interesting for you guys to see just how I tackle my own creations before you like go ahead and put your goodwill in my hands when suggesting topics for the series. I want to address that there is little to no topic that I don't want to talk about. Although of course, like not safe for work content is going to be either heavily vetted or moderated to fit with the guidelines of both the RedLineStation's codex and YouTube's terms. But other than that, there isn't really a topic I'm not willing to consider for an episode, so just throw me what you got and I'll pick out a bunch of topics. If you have a specific artist you'd want me to try and reach out to interview, I would really appreciate it if you noted on which subject in particular you'd want the artist to be interviewed about. And keep in mind that not every artist has like a good setup to record with. Portfolio reviews will be based on a fixed amount of slots that will open sometime soon once I have a potential season scheduled out. These will not be the style of our red lines on the blog, but will instead focus on the artist's capacity as a whole. Keep in mind though that I do not speak for the specific art school, job or institute to which you want to apply. I can only offer my personal opinion and advice based on my own experience. Isn't that crazy? Unlike the event that any of you lovelies want to draw boxy, you will find a link to the sprites used in the description, and it will be featured at the end of an episode with your name and your website. Art of the character, or I guess fan art you could call it, can be forwarded to this email, where I will collect them on a regular basis. But thank you so much for watching and for staying with us at the RedLineStation. It is an absolute pleasure to have you all, and I think I can speak on behalf of everyone on the mod team when I say we are so surprised to see how absolutely massive your reception has been so far. And we are looking forward to help you grow as artists in the future. So with that, I'm Wackart, and this has been the pilot episode for the RedLineStation's podcast series Chatterbucks. Thank you all, and goodbye.